G'day boys and girls, welcome back to the Journey Through the Bible with Adventure Andrew. Today we are going to look for signpost number 5. Now signpost number 5 covers a lot of books in the Bible. It starts with the book of Ruth and goes all the way through to the book of 2 Chronicles. Let's have a look at signpost number 5. This here is called Kings and Prophets. You remember last time we learned in the last signpost that the people of Israel were in the land, but they weren't always obeying God. They needed to be rescued, not just from their enemies, they needed to be rescued from their sin. They needed a ruler and a leader that would help them, that would rule over them and would also help them worship God. Well, this is what introduces us to this, kings and prophets. God is going to give the people of Israel a king. There's actually going to be a few of them, and eventually there's going to be the greatest king of all. But it all begins with a surprising story. It begins in the little town of Bethlehem. There was a man by the name of Elimelech, and he had a wife named Naomi. They had sons, and there was a famine in the land. There was no grain in Bethlehem. So they left. They left to a faraway place, and there in that faraway place, the sons of Elimelech and Naomi got married. But something really sad happened to this family. Elimelech died. And not only did he die, his 2 sons died. And that left Naomi with her 2 daughters-in-law. Naomi decided to go back to the land of Israel, back to Bethlehem. And these 2 daughters-in-law said that they will come with her. And she said, no, stay back. And in the end, one of them decided to stay home. But the other one, her name is Ruth, said, I am going with you. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And she went with her. And they came all the way to Bethlehem. And as they got there, Ruth started to work. She worked in a barley field, collecting the grain so that she could feed herself and also her mother-in-law, Naomi. Well, as you learn this amazing story, something very special happened. There was a man by the name of Boaz. He was a relative of a lady named Rahab. You remember her in Jericho? Well, he saw Ruth and he saw what a wonderful woman she was, a woman who loved God and loved her mother-in-law. And God had allowed these 2 to get married. And these 2 were in Bethlehem, and as they stood there in this barley field, they had no idea about some of the very special things that was going to come from this family. This leads us to the kings. The time came in Israel when Israel got their very first king. And his name was Saul. He was the very first king in Israel. He was a tall man, a handsome man, and he did some really great things. But sadly, he didn't always obey God. And he was not going to be the king that Israel truly needed. God then chose another man, a young man, a man by the name of David. He became the king, the special king who would rule in Israel. This young man, David, was from a place called Bethlehem, the same place where Boaz and Ruth had come from. In fact, he is actually from the same family. This young man, David, became king in Israel. And God spoke to David and made a very special promise to David. He said that your family will be the family from which many kings will come, and eventually there will be a king from your family who will rule forever and ever. He will be the perfect king. This is exactly what God's people needed. They needed somebody to rescue them, a perfect king who would rule over them and bring righteousness to the land. Well, David was a great king, but he wasn't the perfect king. He did many things that were sinful. He did disobey God sometimes. But David also repented. He turned away from his sin and asked God to forgive him of his sin. David was a man after God's own heart, and he loved God. Eventually, David died, and the next king in Israel was a man by the name of Solomon, David's son. And Solomon ruled for about 40 years, and the kingdom continued to grow. Amazing things were happening in the land of Israel. But when Solomon died, something very sad happened in the kingdom. There was an argument, and there was a big problem. The kingdom got split into two. There was now a kingdom in the north and a kingdom in the south. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And this is the beginning of some very sad things that happened in Israel. Even though Israel had kings, none of those kings could take away their sin. So during this time, God sent some men called prophets. These prophets would speak God's word to God's people. They would warn them that if you do not turn from your sin, God will judge you. They spoke for God. These were the prophets. Some of the prophets we remember very well, men like Elijah and Elisha. During this signpost, amazing things have happened to the people now that they're in the land. They now have kings, but the people still need to be rescued from their sin. The prophets tell them about their sin, but the prophets can't stop the people from sinning. The people have kings to rule over them, but the kings can't stop the people from sinning. There have even been priests who can show people how to worship God, but the people keep sinning. We need a perfect priest, a perfect prophet, and a perfect king. But we're going to have to wait to another signpost to find out who that is.